Today we're going to be restoring my daily driver cutting board. I made this thing a few years ago. I posted it up on Reddit. People said it was going to break. It then broke, and then I remade it into what you see today. In the process of remaking it, I kind of overlooked a few details and I included a few knots, which I've kind of just dealt with for the last few years. But like I said, I use this thing every single day and it has seen a lot of abuse, and it's time for a refresh. First and foremost, we need to address these three areas right here. These are knots that are in this piece of walnut. This is a very, very wide piece of walnut. And originally when I had made this board, I went ahead and for the border, I used edged grain. And edge grain and end grain do not mix when creating a cutting board. There's a lot of fighting when the wood is breathing, especially when it is getting exposed to a lot of water and things being chopped on it. So eventually those things broke loose. But in order to combat that, I put these very huge pieces on because I thought that they looked great, and I just kind of looked past these areas. In order to fill these holes, I have these 3 white oak blanks right here. Now, white oak is not my preferred material for this, but it is the material that I had on hand that I think is going to work really, really well. I went ahead and cut this down out of this piece of 4x4 blank. This is old reclaimed white oak out of Pennsylvania. And I went ahead and cut it down to the thickness of our board. What I'm going to be doing is drawing a vector on this, cutting out the plugs, and then clearing out the holes right here, and then using those to plug in. Originally, I was just planning on doing circles out of these, but I think I might switch it up and do some type of a shape. So I might be able to sneak in like an X or some type of strange shape. I forget the actual word for this. Somebody let me know down in the comments when people break pottery and then they put them together with gold in order to accentuate what was once broken. This absolute monstrosity is just a chunk of metal with a dewalt sanding pad attached to it, and we're just going to be using regular old hook and loop sandpaper in order to try and sand this piece, which is a bad idea. Using a CNC machine to sand something is not new at all, but normally when you do something like this, you want it to be able to have a random orbit, so it's not putting the same pattern in and you don't see the swirls and the sanding marks. So normally you would have a counterbalance on this that is shifting it back and forth as it's cutting. The other thing is you really want it to be spring-loaded so that you have enough downward pressure on it without breaking anything. This does not have a counterbalance and it is not spring-loaded. Originally, I had this thing made from Cody over at Cadence Manufacturing when I was trying to figure out how to put a sander onto a linear rail router sled, and then I was planning on selling those with the plans for the linear rail router sled. Now time passes and I'm very glad that I didn't sell these because this could be very dangerous, and I've never used it in a router before. Thankfully, with my spindle, I can put in 1/2-inch shank stuff, so that is what we're going to be doing today. I'm going to create a new bit in Carveco, and I'm just going to have it half the diameter of this 5-inch, so 2.5 inches. I'm going to set the 0 for the X, Y, and Z, and then I'm going to have it just creating an area clearance. Because the sanding pad itself has a little bit of flex to it. It's like a very hard sponge material, but it doesn't have enough flex where you're able to get a ton of downward force on it and not have the CNC machine thinking that something is going wrong. So first and foremost, let's go ahead and cut out all these blanks, cut out our holes in the top of here, and go ahead and glue these in so that we can get to everything else once the glue dries. So to be completely honest, I really didn't think that this was going to work out as well as it did. As you can see here, I just put down 2 pieces of double-sided tape. I put down the 3 little blanks of the end grain material, and then I put in some brad nails into the corner, and I just started milling. Things worked out really, really well, like surprisingly well. I'm pretty sure that I did conventional milling on this, and if I would have done climb milling, I think that I would have had a little bit more fuzzies on the outside, so I didn't even do any type of sanding. Next, I went and put the cutting board down, and the unfortunate part is since it was already pre-finished that we're restoring this, it has a lot of oil and wax on it. So my normal method of double-sided tape and sticking things down to the CNC machine was just not going to work, and I really needed to put these plugs in before I was refinishing the top. I didn't want to take the thickness away from the overall material so that we still had it as thick as possible, especially with it being end grain. The thinner you make it, the more chance there is for warping. So I definitely wanted to go ahead and put these plugs in before I skimmed off the top and the bottom of the blank. So I just grabbed some screws and kind of toe-nailed in these oops clamps that I had lying around from onefinity. They worked fine for the purposes of this, and I cut out the holes for the plugs to go into. The only thing that I wish that I would have done differently here is I had done the offset at 0.02 inches, and I should have done it at like 0.01 or 0.015. I think it's going to work universally well for everybody at 0.02 inches. So if you want the SVGs for these are available in the file downloads alongside this exact cutting board as far as like the size and the juice groove location for this board. So if you're a CNC With Me member, you can go ahead and download all those and you'll have these plug and negative SVG files ready to be used if you want to. Now, after those dried, it was kind of up for figuring out how to take off the bottom of this. Now, I know I made a joke earlier about using my 1/4 inch downtown Jenny in order to fully skim off the material in this, and I wasn't joking. I went ahead and used that for the entire thing, and I ran it at 400 inches per minute at a depth of 0.04 inches. I was very pleased with how it did, and it didn't really take that long at all, especially when running at 400 inches per minute. So in order to hold this thing tight so that the entire top of the piece could be accessed, I went ahead and toe-nailed in some cabinet screws with some really thick washer heads. And things were fine up until that point, and then I put the sanding head in the CNC machine. And because I was very afraid, let's go over to what I put on Instagram. All right, that is recording for YouTube. That is dangerous. We've got our file. Everything looks good to go. Start, and I'm running away. Oh God, that sounds horrible. Let's see. It's technically sanding. Now, that was the very first run of this, and I went through an entire process on figuring out the feeds and the speeds that I needed for this project. Now, obviously you cannot go out and buy this, but Amana sells something very similar, but I think it's like a 4-inch sanding pad, maybe a 3-inch. The fact that this even worked really blew my mind. I thought it was just gonna be kind of like a little thing that I threw in the video, but I sat around for 3 hours of my life trying to figure out how to make this thing sand. First and foremost, my biggest mistake in this was not going down and reflattening the material again, trying to get as much wax and oil out of this board, because all that did was gum up the sandpaper. The fact that this was working was fine because the actual like foam pad itself was absorbing a little bit of the impact, but trying to figure out the feeds and speeds was absolutely miserable. When I first ran it, it was at 18,000 RPM, which was absolutely ridiculous. Imagine when you don't have the oscillating feature of this. It's like a Rotex sander from Festool. So that's like a direct drive motor, so it's really meant to get as much material away as possible, which is great for an end grain cutting board. They're really difficult to sand notoriously. So using something like this isn't the worst thing in the world, but as always with CNC machining, you have to have your feeds and speeds correct in order to get the best results. So I immediately put that down at 8,000 RPM and I started getting a lot better results. It was a whole lot quieter. I was not afraid of dying the entire time. And I started just going through sandpaper, mainly because of the wax and the oil that the board already had in it. And I don't think I would have had that problem near as much if I was just using dry wood that had yet to be finished. 3 hours of this nonstop. I did not think about how difficult this was on the board itself and how much friction I was introducing into it. So unfortunately, I had put a lot of heat into this board and it started kind of like cupping up a little bit. It started getting to the point where it was only sanding the outsides and not the insides. And I felt like I had proved to myself what I was trying to prove, that it was possible, but I'm very far away from having perfected it. So I took out my hand sander and then I finished everything off with the old dewalt, normal oscillating sander. Took everything up from 80 grit all the way up to 300 grit. And during that time as well, I decided to run my bowl cut bit for the juice groove, which was mistake number 42 of the day. I threw in the bowl cut bit and then I guess I just didn't even think about it because when I had first set everything up for the sanding, it didn't need to be square to the machine. So I just threw it in the middle of the CNC machine. So when I zeroed my juice groove to the middle of the board and ran it, I was very sad to see that the juice groove is not completely lined up with the board itself. But as you can see right here, there is just a little bit of a gap, especially with this color change from all of this chaos into the walnut. You can see that it is just thicker in areas and thinner in other areas. Right here, it's so thin and a whole lot thicker. These things happen. When I had plugged this area specifically right here, there was a tiny bit of the knot that I missed. So I went ahead and flipped over the board. I put in some CA glue and I just layered that. I really didn't want to wait for epoxy to dry, so I did it the quick and easy, dirty way of doing it so that just no food would be flying down that hole right there. And I'm pretty happy with the end results. Now, I did go ahead and put on a fairly aggressive roundover to the outside. I think it's a 1/2 inch roundover, and I like that so much more than the way that I had previously set up. Beforehand, when I had set up this file overall, I was going to profile the outside edges to cut off the very sides of these little star pieces that were introduced. And I just like them a whole lot. So as I was cutting this out, I was putting the entire saga on my Instagram stories, and I had a lot of people reach out and ask about the actual finish. Did the finish take to it after the burnishing process of too heavily sanding and pushing down the grain and kind of polishing the wood rather than sanding it, did it actually take finish? And I'm very pleased to say that yes, it did take finish really, really well. And there's so many aspects to an end grain cutting board that make it worth it as far as the price is concerned. Yes, they're incredibly difficult to make to begin with. Putting that oil back onto it just brought it back exactly to the way that it was. None of the oil was pushing out too bad. Actually, it soaked it in so much that I had to add oil to it a few times to make sure that it was nice and happy, because these end grain boards really are incredibly thirsty. So if you're looking to make this exact cutting board as far as the size, the thickness, the juice groove is concerned, we have these files available in Carveco, Vectric, DXF, and SVG files. And I've got the toolpath tutorial where I will take you from an SVG all the way to what you need to be able to CNC machine this out. If you're brand new here, I do a CNC woodworking project every single Friday, and if you want all of the files, all of those are available on cncwithme.com. Thank you so much to all of the members. Y'all are incredible. I will see y'all next week. Bye.
Well, the holidays are right around the corner. You know what that means. It's time to make some cutting boards. So, run right over to Home Depot and pick up some rainbow wood. It's incredibly cheap. It really doesn't factor into the prices that you're going to offer to people that they think are incredibly high. Cut the wood into strips! Now just glue them back up. Cut more strips! Try to get the sunscreen in as many places as you can. After 7 glue ups, you're going to ask yourself, is this worth it? The answer is no. Cut more strips! Cut more strips! But different! And that's how you make a cutting board. This one's headed off to Alabama, it's already been purchased. And this one's $300. Not even kidding.
So you might be thinking, Ham, you forgot the mystery file. And I did. I edited that entire video and then I was like, something feels off. Mystery file. So if you're brand new here, I take some mystery G code that has been sent over by Mitz, who prepares all of the CNC files. I put it into the CNC machine and then we run it. Today was extra special because we were running 3 bits, which was pretty rare these days. We ran our bowl cut bit, we ran our 60-degree groovy Jenny, and then we ran our downtown Jenny to be able to complete this project. Now first I looked at this and I thought, Mitz, I know that you can tie your shoes. Or at least I think I know. I've never really seen you tie your shoes, so. I think once Mitz realized that I was going to make that joke, he sent a message over Facebook saying that it was for my daughter. Thanks, Mitz, and everyone, bye. This time for real.